Professor of the Department of Sociology at the National University of Singapore, as our moderator for the Q&A session. Dr. Sinha holds a Master's in Social Science from NUS and a Master's of Arts degree and a PhD from the Johns Hopkins University. Her research interests include Hindu religiosity in the diaspora, religion-state encounters in colonial and post-colonial moments, Eurocentric and androcentric critique of classical sociological theory, pedagogy, and innovating alternative teaching practices. She's widely published and is also associate editor of the Sociological Quarterly, editorial board member of the American Ethnologist, current Sociology, and co-editor of the Routledge International Library of Sociology. Dr. Sinha, over to you, please.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's really nice to have just heard a fascinating set of voices on the topic of youth and potential in crafts and performing arts. John, we have 30 minutes for Q&A. We're running a bit behind time. Can we assume that we'll carry on for 30 minutes? Okay, that's great. Thank you. So I'm really pleased, and I'm sure you have also been excited by what you heard. We heard a variety of voices from India, from Vietnam, from Cambodia, and Singapore. And interestingly, we also heard from individuals who are involved in curating various crafts and performing arts programs, but we also heard from practitioners themselves, including youth practitioners. And I think that's a really important presence and voice that we can learn from. So as John has said, we have the pigeonhole function through which you can submit your questions. And depending on the votes, I will try and ensure that your questions are addressed to the relevant speaker and answered. So I think one of the couple of very important observations that have been made by the speakers, and I'll just say, very briefly before I move on to the questions. And I think the first one is really to not approach the category of youth as a homogeneous category, because it's obviously very, very diverse. And, I think Mr. Singh right at the end there provided a very nice way of looking at youth by speaking to the categories of young artists on the one hand and public youth on the other. And I think it's, the strategies and interventions that one comes up with to harness youth potential in crafts and performing arts would depend on which category of youth we are talking about. And the other issue that really, I think, was driven home by all of the speakers was really the idea that ICH is not just about the past, but that it's constantly evolving and changing. And, this can actually be a leveraging point for attracting young people so that, they don't just think of arts and performing arts as something that's stuck in the past or traditional. So with that, I'm actually going to turn to the pigeonhole because we do have questions coming in. And the first question that I want to address is to Ms. Doe. And the question is, how can we reduce generation crisis between younger and older generations, in terms of dealing with ICH? Ms. Doe, would you like to take that question, please?
Okay, thank you, professors. So very interesting questions. So, for to deal the gap between the old and the young and to deal the crisis among the generations during the preservation ICH. So how our roles in how we can let them recognize the importance of the cooperation to preserve their cultures. They need to sit and cooperate together to discuss what is the essential value can be kept for their intangible cultures. However, for the modern life, maybe the youth also want to train to have some kind of creative to introduce to outsiders. So if they can discuss and can decide which parts can keep at the core value and which part they can flexible to change to adapt with the new life. For example, in the weaving groups, we have experience like that. The two people, they decide to keep their motive, their pattern at the core value that wouldn't change. However, for the color combination among the thread, the material to weave. They can change so that both sides can happy and the young generation can have the more time and more place for create the new idea for the intangible culture become the tangible products. So this is very important to let them decide and sit together to recognize how is the importance of the corporations each others. Is it clear for my answer to all of you?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for your comprehensive but brief answer. The next two questions I'm going to address to Ms. Shafiqa because they're kind of related. So the first question is, have there been opportunities for synergies with other Malay music groups in Singapore, and how can that enhance the propagation of Malay folk music? And the related question is, could you share what have been some of the challenges of attracting young Singaporeans to become full-time cultural performing artists? Ms. Shafiqa, over to you, please.
Okay, thank you, Professor Vineeta. All right, so yes, in fact, there has been, synergies in terms of getting groups in traditional Malay music to come together and make music. And this just started 4 years ago, actually, in 2018, where it's actually a festival of traditional Malay music, and it combines together traditional Malay music practitioners and groups in Singapore that in fact has come about because of the, like I said earlier, the industry, the wedding service industry. And in this manner, in this kind of synergy, there are certain things that were happening in that particular festival, which I was part of as well. So in that, the first installment of the festival saw us coming together and making a kind of like a collective showcase of traditional Malay music, which was really very difficult because there are actually 12 to 6 about 14 to 16 groups at that time. And how do you showcase traditional Malay music in such a way that is fair to all musicians? That was one of the challenges that we faced. But I should say that it was a really good run because that festival itself, it introduced a program like Rentas, which is basically a residency program that called youths within the scene to come together to create new music out of the traditional practice. So I was a part of that as well. And so hopefully this kind of movement can help to sort of look into, make traditional Malay music more refreshing and more attractive to the younger generation. So yeah, that's my first part. And the second part of the question, I think it's, to be honest, I think it's really very difficult to attract young Singaporeans to become full-time cultural performing artists, especially that of the Malay culture, Malay music. I should say also that most of the groups in Singapore, they are actually not all of them are full-time or full-time cultural groups. Most of them, like my group as well, we are actually kind of like a passion group. And the musicians, they do have other jobs. Some of them are still schooling. Some of them just started work, you see. So our activities take place in the weekends. For myself, I am a full-time musician. And to become a full-time musician in Singapore itself is very difficult. So you really need to find ways to kind of sustain yourself. Going into education, you have to really do a lot of things. Performing arts, you have to perform, you have to perform, educate, and things like that. It's really difficult, to be honest. So the challenges, these are the challenges that I'm facing myself. How do you attract people to come into the culture, to come into the music? And I do what I can with what I've shared earlier, getting them on board through something that they are already familiar with. Yes, I think that's what I can share with these questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Shafiqa. We have another question which is actually directed to all the panelists, but I'm going to invite Ms. Krupa Rajangam to start us off on the discussion. So the question is this: if, as the speakers have noted, the ICH is dynamic and fluid, what exactly are we safeguarding or seeking to preserve, and how do we define what is traditional and what is authentic. So can I please request Ms. Rajangam to start off this discussion, please?
Thank you, Professor Sinha.
Hi.
Yeah, that's a complex question. So, okay. To start with, I mean, if you look at it at the level of the policy itself, so ICH was meant to be a counterpoint to conservation of tangible heritage, right? Which is seen as something which is fixed at a particular location, and it has these values that are like predetermined in some way. But the reality, though, is that, we can't actually separate out the tangible and the intangible. So I see both these policies as coming together, which is where I would question the category of traditional and authentic, right? So authenticity is something we imagine. It's not that it's a bad thing, right? All of us need some form of stability to hold on to, and which is what COVID has shown us over these last 18 months, right? We need something to give us permanence or something to root us, right? So cultural expressions, cultural forms are like an immediate good fit, that sense of belonging, the sense of, you've come from somewhere and you're going somewhere else, right? So all I would suggest is that we don't accept things at face value, right? If somebody says this is traditional and authentic, I would suggest asking that back to that person as to why, right? What moment in time defined that as authenticity? What moment in time defined that as traditional, right? So then that will help us decide how to take it forward. Maybe 50 years ago, Ishwarappa's stone carving, the authenticity was in recreating those traditional motifs of the medieval period. But maybe 50 years later today, the authenticity of Ishwarappa's stone carving is the fact that he's not using machines and he's still continuing to use tools that were handed down over generations to ensure the nuance is still there in the carving, right? So the form of the carving might not be traditional that way, but the process would be authentic, right? So these are kind of questions we would take at different points of time before we predetermine some category.
Right. Thank you. I mean, it's a very complex question, but I guess the related question is, to whom does it matter, right? These categories of traditional and authentic. Does it matter to the artist? So just a point for discussion, but thank you for your feedback. I wanted to invite Mr. Seng, actually, from Cambodia, to address the same question. Mr. Seng, we'd like to hear your view on this. Mr. Seng, are you there?
Yes, you hear me?
Hi. Yes, thank
okay.
you.
Thanks for the question addressing to all the speakers. And this is really, really like a tricky question, and the question has no particular answer to that to me. So in terms of like the question that say, if ICH is dynamic or fluid, what exactly we are safeguarding or seeking to preserve? For that one, I think it depends on the context, especially in each country or in each region or in each area in that country even. So to me, it depends on, like, because all the ICH has its own value, but we have to see we have to see based on that context what kind of ICH that needs to that can contribute the most to that. This is something that I have no specific answer to that, but this is something I just want to suggest to do. And we also need to think about like how apart from like the priority that through its contribution to the society, we also need to see like how Sorry, I forgot my answer, but let me move forward to the next question in terms of, and then maybe if I can remember, I will come back to answer the first questions.
Sure,
So,
thank you.
Okay, so and then the next question, how to define traditional and authentic. So to me, traditional refers to the culture, something or belief, you know. And in turn, that's just to me. And then talking about authentic, it depends on how you experience this. You know, like the environment, for example, like sometimes when I tell you, oh, this is authentic, then but when you go into that experience, you don't feel it is authentic, you know. But the other might get the authentic experience. So it is. So this definition would refer to the exact experience, the direct experience that you guys have. Oh, now I remember one thing that regarding to what exactly are we safeguarding. I think to this context right now is about the living arts. So the arts that are living as a part of daily life of the people, that is the important that we. So once again, the living arts that part of the daily life, and the living art that can contribute more to the society where you are in. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Since this question is for everyone, I did want to invite Ms. Do and Ms. Shafika to add their views if they would like to.
May I?
Yes, please.
I very agree with the ideas from Ms. Cooper and Ms. Songsen. I just want to add a small things like with our understanding, the traditional means some things may change depend on the situation and generations. And but for the authentic, it could not change. It's not change because it's the essential cultures and it's the matter for the value in each cultures. So that's why that this is our definition between traditional and authentic. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Shafika, would you like to say something on this question?
Yes, I totally agree with what Ms. Do said and added on to that as well, because I think that authenticity also has to do with how the music, I'm talking about my art form in this sense, how the music kind of relates to the other generations, and we feel that essence, we feel that the living arts that were practiced before. So there's a need to kind of preserve that essence, even though we are looking towards, changing society, we are adapting to the changing society and adapting our arts in that way, we still need to be able to preserve that authenticity so that it can be still seen as something that is valuable, that is attached to the value of that culture and heritage. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all for responding to that not so straightforward question. I'm going to take two questions now, which are actually directed at our keynote speaker, Ms. Mo Chiba. And both of these questions actually speak to the availability of economic support for the arts and performing, for crafts and performing arts. So let me read out the two questions that have been asked, right? So the first question is, it takes time to let youth participate in the arts by income improvement for community development. What would be an effective entry point to activate youth? And the second question, also directed at Ms. Mochiba, is selfish as we are wanting to preserve ICH, but not providing the socioeconomic support to the community involved is problematic, and how should we address this gap? So may I invite Ms. Mochiba to take us through those two questions?
Okay, thank you, Professor Sinha, for Vineeta, for these questions. Now, yes, improving income of a community is not an easy job, and it takes time. It takes time, and when observe any NGOs, any entities who got successful examples, who got successful results, actually have worked at least for 10 years to create that results. And maybe at the end of 10 years, when there is when the fruit is coming, this is when actually you start getting interested. So to be very honest, there's no quick fix. And if one is not ready to engage with the same community for that long period of time and invest that much energy, I often say it's better not to start any community development projects because it's not very responsible. Now, having said this, now when we worked, we started with youth, we often try to entice youth by using IT skills. That is also not for the ICH, but let's say for another projects that UNESCO was dealing with on how to kind of engage youth getting interested in conservation of the heritage monuments or the historical sites, and so we wanted to engage youth in doing the documentation of the heritage sites. Now they are not usually interested in documentation of heritage sites; they find it very boring. But instead, we said, okay, we'll teach you how to make the website. We teach you the IT skills, how to use the app and how to use some basic software to do the website. This, suddenly the youth were interested. So we used this IT skills, training on IT skills as an entry point. And that was also very much based on the experience of the another NGO I mentioned about Digital Empowerment Foundation, who uses IT skills as an entry point to address so many other things. So that was one way, but yes, it's a difficult question. It's there's no quick fix when it comes to community development. Now, and of course, that's I see another related question is, okay, you want to safeguard ICH, but you don't want to be engaged in the community livelihood projects. What do we do? Of course, not all the entities would be good at community mobilization and livelihood support. And as I said earlier, it takes long period of time. If you're not committed to provide, long-term investment, better not to. I better, encourage not to start anything because you just create a hope, which and then you disappoint them. But what I kind of encourage you is that we can still work with other entities. I mean, we can offer our different expertise. Some might be good at documentation. Some might be just good at exhibitions, and do the social media promotions. You can partner with different entities. Because what I notice in the world of ICH is that there are people working at their own level doing something very specific about ICH, but they don't collaborate together. So professor is just studying, but this study result is not used for any purposes. And some entities are very good at doing the craft sales, but they often don't have a strong academic knowledge about the craft tradition, so that their marketing skill is kind of very shallow because they don't have it. But then if they collaborated, maybe it could, you can create a better result. So, yeah. So my suggestion is that you can try to support ICH with your own ways, but then look at partnering with other entities to support each other, rather than try to just be the only champion, in this domain.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. So there's a question here for all the panelists, actually, and I'm going to flag it on the screen. So, many millennials want freedom and flexibility and also instant gratification at work, but becoming a master or expert of ICH takes very long. How can we address this mismatch of expectations? Since this is addressed to all, I'll invite all panelists to speak, and I'd like to invite Ms. Krupa to start us off, please.
Thank you, Professor Sinha. Yeah, so these are the kind of encounters I have very often in the field, and my particular focus is craft. And this is where, like the previous question of the tradition, authenticity, freedom and flexibility to work sort of come together. Because what I have seen is maybe there is a traditional goldsmith. When I say traditional, in the sense of the caste identity is connected with the craft that the person is practicing. is no longer interested. There is somebody from a different caste group who's personally interested in the kind of interest in the work involved, but there are these barriers which prevent that person from taking on this occupation or the trade or the craft which is associated with one particular caste, right? But the good thing is that working extensively in the field, I have seen that often the ones who are really keen figure out ways to overcome obstacles. So I have seen so-called, let's say, the traditional woodworking craft people who are no longer from the Badika, the traditional caste that is doing this. They come from like the Potter caste. I have seen a goldsmith who was not interested and who has now gone into the folk performances, right? Because the way or putting on of the costume and the persona was of more interest to him. But at a larger level, the difficulty is more about how do you do this across, and it's not limited to individuals who are able to overcome these obstacles. And honestly, I don't have an answer to that because from my experience, what I've seen is, like Ms. Chiba was saying, it really takes a very, very long time and you get frustrated because you expect to see results in 2-3 years. You have like your peers who are maybe doing outsourcing work in IT and then they are getting returns much quicker and then they're able to buy new cell phones. So it's very difficult to balance this out.
Thank you. Thanks. Ms. Do, would you like to?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes. So like the question already mentioned, to become a master or expert of ICH, it takes very long time. So I wonder under the VUCA time is now the VUCA time, right? Why we need to take a long time to become master? So I mean, if we can consider to promote under community development, because in community like our presentation mentioned, we have the seniors, we have the middle, and we have the youth. So the role of each generation is different. We can base on their strong point and can identify and recognize what's the understanding in their community so that they can together preserve their intangible culture rather than we need to take many time and long time to become expert and then start from that point. I think it's a little bit late to preserve the intangible cultures. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Singh, over to you.
Thanks for the questions. To me, I think, I don't see there is a gap at all. But in terms of mismatch, I also don't see. I think this is like to become the master. I think that is just telling about the level that we want, and everything has the master, and all master level always takes time. It doesn't, like it always need the people to make their best effort to reach out to the master level. But in terms of, I think like Ms. Du said, I think in terms of joining and safeguarding ICH, it doesn't need to be that level. That level is for those who really get more interested in learning more. So, for example, like the youth program that we are working with, we don't have, we never expect that like at least 50 of them, but 50% of them would become the master of the skill that we're providing. But I'm sure some of them would become that, but we don't know who and we don't know when they're going to become. But at the same time, they can join actively to safeguarding ICH. Through like keep telling about their friends about that, and at least they know the community there. If they want to reach out to, and if they want to help promote, they know where and who to talk to. I think that should be enough for this. So that's my answer.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So there are still a couple of questions and we have probably less than 10 minutes. So I'm going to take the general questions. And so this is a question to all panelists. And I think this is an important one, given the binary of tradition and modernity, past and present and future that we deal with and use when we are talking about youth. So the question is this: can you speak about the influence of dominant, popular, mainstream cultural traditions in your respective contexts? For instance, Western classical music or Korean pop music. And I suppose the discussion could take kind of a position about whether these influences exist and whether they've been, empowering or debilitating, right? So I'm going to again invite Ms. Krupa to start us off. I'm just following the sequence of presentations that were made.
Yeah, thank you. I did see this question as it popped up briefly, and I was trying to sort of think back from my own experience. So again, I will be speaking from the perspective of crafts. There is definitely the influence of what is typically called mainstream cultural traditions. And it's kind of a trade-off, right? So in some instances, the crafts person, like let's take the stone carver Ishwarappa again, he might be trained in carving, let's say, Chola kind of figurines or Vijayanagara period figurines, but that's not what sells. And then somebody comes and sees his studio and commissions him to do something, say, for the garden, right? So he's typically been working with like a functional purpose, and now he's asked to do something that is ornamental. So some of them resist because they feel it is somehow dishonoring the tradition of the craft they have inherited. But there are others who welcome it because they see that they are able to balance these two worlds, right? So they also take on these popular commissions for putting these ornamental figurines in the garden. But at the same time, then they're able to then maybe make these idols for groups and for smaller shrines who may not otherwise be able to get those kind of idols from them. So it's kind of, some choose to reject and some try to balance both worlds because they see the plus and minus both ways.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Doe?
Yes, I agree that maybe there are some kind of influence to the cultural traditions. However, under my thinking, we have the two people, for example, they have their own folk songs, and the people here in their traditional cultures, like the traditional festival, they still use their own songs to dance, to sing, rather than just use the Korean or the Western classical music. So I feel the youth, they are very flexible how to use the modern music with the traditional music, especially in their mainstream, so that they can balance between the modernized and the classicalized.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Shafiqa?
Yes, I think that, in Singapore, there are dominant popular mainstream traditions in terms of pop music, Korean pop music, and all these kinds of things. They attract the youth, and this is what the youth, in any urban development, urban countries, they're listening to. I think, in my perspective, I think this is what is dominant for them. And of course, I think for traditional cultures, it's more to us trying to use these influences to try and reach out to them. It's still, for me, in my perspective, I still think that majority of the traditional arts practitioners here are still trying to preserve what we've been doing before. But at the same time, it comes simultaneously. At the same time, we're also looking into ways into reaching out to the youth by having these influences into the music in my art form context, in the context of traditional Malay music. This has been happening. We do see compositions which kind of like in a way they are ethnic pop genres. They try to use modern sounds to appeal to the listening conditions of the youth. But in essence, I still think that there's still the traditions are still being kept in place. This is just a way to kind of to disseminate and promote the music.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Singh.
Okay, thanks for the questions. So in Cambodia, I think the influence really happens a lot, and it also helps Cambodian artists work out and to adapt themselves into such influence, but they also still find their own ways to go together. Like the Western culture or tradition and Cambodian tradition, how we goes together rather than just to. Before now, I think many youth they really capture quickly the influence like the Western culture and things like that. But right now, it seems like they more open and they try to find ways to go together. Even though still some concern, for example, like the scale, the Western music scale. Now people try to adapt their musical instruments according to the Western scale, like music notation. But many of them now they forget about Cambodian traditional music scale. So something like that. But I still find that so far still okay, and we put committed to go together. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think I'm going to take a final question, and I think this is a good note on which to end this panel. And, all panelists have been asked this question: what is the intangibility of ICH? It pertains to the practice, but also meanings behind the practice itself. Is this distinction defined enough in the ways we formally think about ICH today? So I think given the brief of this work symposium of the next today and tomorrow, right? This is a really relevant question, and may I invite all panelists to respond to this as a final statement for today. So let's start with Ms. Krupa.
Thank you. Yes, as you pointed out, this is definitely something worth thinking about. Personally, I would speak from my own experience, and I would say that I do not see the distinction between the tangible and the intangible. To me, there is a holistic is the wrong word, it sounds romantic again. Let's say an integrated expression of heritage. And so it's both the product and the process coming together, and you cannot separate it out, right? So typically with crafts in particular, it is seen as the craft product. The material, tangible expression is given more importance than let's say, the intangibility of the craftsperson working, or the skills, or the songs they sing when they're doing a particular kind of part of their process, right? So that's the first part of the question. Considering the ICH of UNESCO, I don't think the distinction is defined enough, right? So that's probably more to do with the history and the politics of what led to the Intangible Heritage Convention being framed and passed at the moment that it did. So maybe this question is a good opportunity for UNESCO to reflect back on, okay, it had to be done at that point of time, but there's enough time to reflect back on what is it that ICH is planning to do going forward.
Right, thank you. That's good ways forward. Ms. Doe?
Yes, thank you, professors. So with me, the intangibility in ICH today is mean conceptual value. So even if we cannot see this one, but we have the common value in communities and cultures. So with the Kachin people, for example, they call this the souls. It means something inside. So that one, even we could not touch, we can catch what it means, the core value in the communities. So I believe that with this concept, meanings, so it's very meaningful for the next tomorrow date. We have the more discussion, and it's have money meaningful for discussing about this ICH. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shafika.
I think I think that this distinction, in preserving ICH, I think we also have to see that, there are meanings behind the practice that has to kind of like, see through when we talk about ICH, like for, in my experience, traditional Malay music, urban-based Malay folk music practice in Singapore, we do see it, we hear it. That's the tangible form of that, the practice. but the practice itself, like going into, for example, how are we looking into attracting the youth, and how are we looking into propagating the music, like how do we teach? Yeah, which is I think an area that still needs to be worked on for the urban-based Malay folk music culture and scene in Singapore. This intangibility aspect, I think needs to, I think it has to, we have to look into that sense as well, other than just it, something that is visual. This is my thoughts so far. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Ms. Shafika. And Mr. Singh, your thoughts on this question, please.
Okay. So may I clarify the question? So the question is, I know that about intangibility of ICH, but the last question confirm about intangibility refers to practice and some things behind that practice. Is that correct?
Yes, I think the question is referring to, the intangible of the intangible cultural heritage, and whether that's a meaningful category for us to look at heritage or not, and whether the binary of tangible versus intangible is a tenable one or not.
I think to me, just those distinctions to cover, we need something. Maybe something to explain or to elaborate a bit more on that, so that it can, for me, I still feel not enough with just saying that, because then it's like mention about it, but the listener or the people that we are trying to tell about that would not know what exactly we are trying to tell them about, So it is more than just practice. And of course, it is correct that it is more than, and there's a lot more behind that. But I think what kind of behind that, for example, like you need to think about the environment, like, the atmosphere that it has to be, it has to have those practices, and also the living treasure. I means the people who hold that kind of ICH knowledge. So how can we include those people, so that we, like the people we are trying to tell them can have more visualization about what we are going to explain them. So that's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Singh. So I think, we are well beyond the time that we were given for the Q&A, but I thought it was more important to ask the general questions addressed at all panelists. There were a couple of questions to a specific panelist that I didn't get to ask, asking. My apologies for that. But please join me in thanking all the panelists. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to John. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Vineeta. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Before we leave, we'd like to request that you complete the feedback form via the Pigeonhole platform and key in the passcode NHB ICHCAP or scan the QR code on the screen here. With that, we have come to the end of day one of the 2021 Southeast Asian Collaborative Meeting on Safeguarding ICH. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all our panelists and moderator today again. And most importantly, thank you all, our audience, for tuning in to today's webinar. Please remember to join us again tomorrow for day 2 of the 2021 Southeast Asian Collaborative Meeting. And the topic tomorrow will be the digital medium. So thank you again to everyone for joining us on the first day of the symposium. See you tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.